Research Data Scotland. So we have a very busy session today with several speakers. I will keep my part short. All of them are going to talk to us about the Food and You2 survey, talking about food is very fitting that we are hosting this at lunchtime. Just a quick reminder that we are recording this session, and also if you have any questions throughout the seminar, you can either pop them on the chat or just wait until the end when we have our Q&A session. So just to start, we have Eleanor from RDS who wants to give a couple of initial remarks.
Thank you, Catalina. I've just got a couple of slides just to introduce Research Data Scotland to those people who are not familiar with us. I'm hoping that Rachel's going to share the slides, but she may have got caught up doing something else while she's hopefully sorting them. Research Data Scotland. That's okay, Rachel. We're really focused on unlocking the power of public sector data to make it quicker and simpler to do research which improves lives. And really do that by working in partnership with other organisations within the network in Scotland to widen the range of data available, make access to new data assets, and providing a single point of contact for effective access to public sector data. We're particularly interested in the use of data in setting and measuring the impact of government policies. In the output from the Food and You2 survey will be used in the monitoring framework of the proposed Scottish Government Good Food Nation plan. Specifically, it's going to be used for looking at consumer-related changes to eating habits and food-related behaviours, and the proportion of Scottish consumers concerned with animal welfare. So really important information from the survey will be used to help the understanding of that policy and its impact. However, we're also really excited about the future potential when survey data may become linkable to other data sources from the Scottish and the UK government. And that would really help us to explore cross-sectional questions in areas such as animal health, human health, food and environment. Could you go to the next slide, please? We're some way off having the Food and You2 data available for linking, but when we do, these are the sorts of data sets we'd be looking to link them to, and this just gives you a view of what's available now, what we're working on currently, and what some of the future plans are. And the most important thing is that to enable linkage, each data set must have sufficient information so that we can index it against a spine. To date, most of our data has been about individuals, so we use a Scottish population spine with details about people and CAI numbers, which allows health data to be linked. And we're just starting to bring in place-based UPRN data, which is at an individual property level, and that can be linked to individuals, but also allows us to look at households. So again, the link with the Food and You2 survey, I think, would be really important. So that's why we're really excited about the presentations today, and I'm really hoping that Rachel and the team will be able to introduce you to a really exciting data source. So I'll pass you over to Rachel.
Thanks, Eleanor. That's great. I'll just share my slides, so if you can give me an indication in a second. You can see.
We can see, but it's not in presenter mode yet.
Is it in presenter mode now?
Now it is.
Perfect. That's great. Well, thanks so much, Eleanor, and thank you very much for hosting us today. Rachel, it's great to be here. As Eleanor and Rachel suggested, we're going to be presenting on basically our survey and the research that we run on consumer attitudes towards food. And this will be from myself, Matt Jenkins, and Sue from FSS. And I'm very pleased that Dr. Beth Armstrong from the University of Sheffield is also able to be here to share her insights as an academic, how she uses the data and research. So just before we move on to the content, this is just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes or so. So as I say, myself and Matt, we're going to introduce the FSA, who we are, and then what is Food and You2 and what do we do with it. I'll then hand over to Sue, who's going to introduce Food Standards Scotland, and then go in a bit of a deep dive in terms of the Scottish data from Food and You2. And then we'll hand over to Beth, who will sort of explore how she's used the Food and U2 data in her research before looking forward and thinking what are our next steps in terms of increasing the use, outputs and impact of Food and U2 data. So to begin with, who is the Food Standards Agency and what do we do? Well, the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, is an independent non-ministerial department, so that means we don't have a minister associated with us. We were established in 2000 in response to major food safety incidents like BSE, and our legal duties are set out in the Food Standards Act 1999, and we operate across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And our core mission is a big one, but it's quite a simple one really, and it's to protect public health and consumer interests in relation to food. We ensure that food is safe, that it's accurately described, and we support efforts to make it more healthier and more sustainable. Importantly, and this is where we come in as the analysts in the FSA, we want to provide science-based policy evidence and advice, monitor development and commission research. We also regulate food safety, enforce controls, and assess new food on the market. We are governed by an independent board, and we work closely with Food Standards Scotland. And this is also just to give you an idea of some of the things that we produce and the work we do. So this is the FSA strategy that we produce every 5 years, and this is the FHRS rating. So you might be familiar with this, you might not be. In Scotland it's a slightly different rating, but this is the food hygiene rating that food businesses will place on their doors, so after an inspection. So our mission and vision, as I said, it's a big one, it's quite simple. It's simply food you can trust. So we want a food system in which food is safe. It is what it says it is, so people can be confident in the accuracy of the food labels, and that it's healthier and more sustainable. So why do we need data on consumers' perspectives? Well, one of the FSA's core objectives is to protect public health and ultimately the interests of consumers. And so to do that effectively, we need to understand what people think about food, like what they know, how they behave. And this is pretty crucial to Food and U2, how it changes over time. Consumer attitudes and behaviours aren't static. They shift. They shift with trends, they shift with technology, they shift with global events. So it's really important we keep track of those changes, and it helps us make better decisions and provide advice that's relevant to making evidence-based policy decisions. So to gather this information, we run two main surveys. The first is Food and U2, which gives us detailed insights into consumer attitudes and behaviours over time. And the second is the Consumer Insights Tracker, which provides more frequent updates so we can spot emerging issues quickly. And importantly, obviously these are two different surveys, but we use them together. And we use them together in order to get a really clear picture of what's happening in this food system from a consumer's point of view. So before I just go on and give a bit more detail about Food and U specifically, I just want to give a sense of the difference between Food and U2 and the Consumer Insights Tracker. So Food and U2 is quite different from the tracker. Food and U2 is an annual survey rather than monthly. So it gives us a deeper, more comprehensive snapshot of consumer attitudes and behaviours every year. And the way we collect that is also different. We use a push-to-web approach, which means that we encourage people to complete the online survey, but we also offer a postal option for those who prefer it. So it's a mixed mode design, and it helps us to reach a really broad range of participants. Importantly, Food and U2 uses a random probability sample, and that means that every household has a chance to be selected, which makes the data much more representative of the population. And because of this rigorous approach, Food and U2 is classified as an official statistics, so that's kind of really the gold standard. And importantly, Food and U2 is designed, as I've said, to measure and gather data over time, and it's enabling that trend analysis through the time series that makes Food and U2 particularly valuable and important for the FSA. Whereas the Consumer Insights Tracker is different, but it really complements Food and U2. So the Consumer Insights Tracker is a short online survey. It's about 10 minutes, and is completed by members of an online panel. The design is simple but flexible, and there's a set number of core questions, but there's also different questions that we can add in and out of the survey for specific topics when needed. So unlike Feeding You 2, the tracker is, if you like, designed to be a bit more flexible and to respond to sort of more emerging or urgent issues on an ad hoc basis whenever needed. Obviously, the sampling is slightly different. And because of the sampling approach, it's not considered an official statistic, but obviously it's still really important. And as I say, we use these two surveys together to get a really a broad but detailed picture of consumer attitudes and behaviours. So Feeding You 2, as I said, it's an official statistic and it covers adults aged 16 and over living in households across England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The survey measures people's self-reported knowledge, attitudes and behaviours around lots of issues, and I'll come on to those in a minute, but broadly food safety and other food-related habits. And this information is really valuable because it helps us understand what consumers are doing, what they're thinking, and it highlights where we might need further action or targeted communication or additional research. There's also a devolved nation approach to Feeding You 2. And so the FSA's remit covers England, Wales and Northern Ireland, whereas Food Standards Scotland is responsible for food policy and regulation in Scotland. So Feeding You 2, it covers all nations, but Food Standards Scotland reports on the Scottish data separately. And we also, within the survey, have some questions that are for specific organisations or countries. So Northern Ireland and Scotland, in addition to they have their own sort of questions specific to their own strategic priorities, as do DEFRA. And so, sorry, I skipped a slide. There we go. So this just gives you sort of a broad snapshot of the use and purpose of Feeding You 2. As I said, it's sort of, if you like, the gold standard of statistics for us. It's robust and representative. It measures the prevalence of behaviours or conditions, such as food hypersensitivities and food insecurity. Over time and among different parts of the population. So through, and Matt will cover this in a minute, through the cross breaks we have available, we were able to do sort of subgroup analysis of different groups and parts of the population. We're able to measure the FSA's performance against the strategy. We've got data for individual countries. We've got that long-term trends over time. We have data on a breadth of policy areas, and this helps to inform policy decision-making and evaluations. It informs that consumer messaging, and it just creates that more in-depth analysis of consumer attitudes and behaviours over time. But what's actually in the survey? What are the topics that we're covering? So these are the topics, if you like, the modules that we have in Feeding You 2. So some questions are about trust in the FSA and the food system. So how much trust do people have in the FSA? How confident are they in the food system? All these kind of things give us a sense of trust and confidence in the FSA, but the food system more broadly. We have modules and questions on food insecurity. So this enables us to measure and track how food secure and insecure different parts of the population are. We have questions on food safety behaviour. So things like washing hands, food preparation, use of chopping boards, how people are reheating food and storing food in their fridge, knowledge about things like how the temperature of their fridge, all these kind of things that give us indications of behaviour in the kitchen and at home. And then in contrast, we're also interested in what people do outside the home. So we have a module on eating out and the FHRS. So the FHRS is the food hygiene rating scheme. So that is the 1 to 5 gradation, the grading scheme that food businesses are assessed by. And you often see a sticker in the window that will have what they've achieved from their inspection. We have questions on food hypersensitivities, so that will be allergies and intolerances and celiac disease, and it will cover a range of different things from the prevalence, the prevalence of different hypersensitivities, the severity of them, how people were diagnosed, and then people with food hypersensitivities, their day-to-day, everyday experience of what it's like eating out, how confident they are, when's the last time that they had a reaction, and how severe was it, how confident are they when asking for allergen information when eating at restaurants. We also have questions on food shopping and labelling. And finally, on healthy and sustainable diets. So as you can see, as I've just obviously been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but this gives you a sense of how these different topics really sort of feed into and meet the needs of the sort of FSA's strategic objectives, you know, our mission and values to make sure that food is safe and is what it says it is. So just before we kind of move on to sort of, if you like, the methods of feeding UT, just wanted to give you sort of a brief history of how we got to where we are now. And as you can see, it's been in development for many years. As the name suggests, Feeding You 2, there was something that existed before, and that was Feeding You. And Feeding You was the biannual face-to-face survey that ran from 2010 to 2018. And after a review by the Advisory Committee for Social Science, who recommended that it should move to a push to web approach, Feeding You 2 was launched, and this was officially launched in 2020. And so this is when it moved to biannual, so it's every 6 months, and it was, as I say, a push to web approach. And that was Feeding You 2 has sort of really been in place until really last month when Wave 10 was published. And Wave 10 marked the final wave that had that biannual approach. And Wave 11, which is now out of field, we've got the data, we're looking to publish it in March. That represents our move to annual. And so Feeding You 2 will be an annual survey. It still has, then as the next slide will show, a lot of the same features of the biannual approach, but it's going to be run every year rather than every 6 months. And methodologically, that will make things a lot more streamlined and enable us to actually report on trends and time series on an annual basis. So this just gives you a sense of what's changed between the different iterations of Feeding You. So really, when you're looking at this, as you can see, the main changes is between Feeding You and Feeding You 2. So around the 2020 mark. So when it moved from face-to-face to mixed mode. But as you can see, the frequency has changed quite a lot. That's probably one of the biggest changes as well. And the sample size. So it was a Wave 8 and Wave 10 where Scotland was included. And as we move to annual, so Wave 11, Scotland will be included in every wave moving forward. But the sample design and it being an official statistic are elements of Feeding You 2 that have never changed. So I'll hand over to Matt now.
Yep. Thank you, Rachel. I'm Matt. I'm in the sort of stats team. And so I'll talk a little bit about the sort of methodology. I'll try and highlight the things that I think are going to be particularly useful from an outside researcher point of view. And I will sort of whiz through. Rachel, can you skip that slide, please? Just because we're playing catch up slightly and you have covered quite a lot of stuff already on that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, perfect. So, as Rachel say, we're collecting sort of 7,000 responses, individual responses, 1,000 in Scotland. That gives us quite a large sample, which allows us to sort of break things down by all the socio-demographics you would expect from a social survey, so country, gender, all the rest. Other things that might be particularly interesting for an outside researcher is that we look at food poverty, and for that we use the US Department of Agriculture's measure. That sets us apart slightly from other UK surveys, particularly the Department of Work and Pensions, who also measure food insecurity. Theirs is a 30-day measure, whereas we're looking at the whole year. And so it gives a different perspective. And so all of the questions in the survey are sort of broken down by that as a cross break. That's in the data when you sort of get the data to play about with. You've also got a load of stuff that is FSA specific, so things like responsibility for cooking, which will have potentially applications that you can use, but they're sort of a useful reminder from our point of view. I see there's a question there, the thing which we'll get back to when we get to questions, but I have seen that. Just to sort of remind you that this is it's an administrative survey. It's primarily there for sort of our use, And so you've got that sort of secondary data problem that you always have with secondary data. The other thing that I should sort of flag up is we do break down by ethnicity. Obviously, Scotland's ethnicity definitions are different from those used in other parts of the UK, and that is taken account of. So the Scottish ethnicity is not directly comparable with the ethnicity elsewhere. Next slide, please, Rachel. We've got a variety of outputs, a variety of ways you can access the data. Rachel writes a report or a series of reports. We also periodically, but moving from wave 11, every single wave, we'll be looking at trends, because obviously we've got for all questions by that point, three waves of data, so we can make comparisons over time with statistical significance. There is data that we put up currently in the UKDS, UK Data Service, and obviously now RDS Scotland for the Scottish data, so you can actually access the raw figures. And then we've got a set of secondary reports. Oh, and we've got the bit that I actually do, which is put the data tables together. And Rachel, next slide, please. We'll see a sort of example of that. So these are sort of come out at the same time as our reports. And this is just to give you an idea of the sort of things that we're sort of covering. So you can see we've got the demographic breakdowns. Actually, one thing that we sort of haven't talked about is that because obviously all social surveys, you're very unlikely to hit an entirely representative sample. We weight to try and make our sample more representative by gender with age band, to take account of mode effects, because this is both respondents respond both online and by paper, and by deprivation quartile as well. And so you can see we've got sort of raw data there, unweighted. We then have weighted data, and that's what we're sort of quoting the percentages for, both in the tables and the reports. Next slide, please, Rachel. Beautiful. And so the challenges of FIDU 2 are largely the challenges you would expect from a social survey. Social surveys in general, declining response rate. And one of the reasons for sort of push to web was to sort of increase that. We again mitigate that through weighting. We also try and push the sample as large as we can. We've got methodological complexity, both of mixed mode and historically, modules coming in, modules coming out. We have a variety of questions that are sort of core, and then we have some questions that have come in for some waves. We've also got the particularly if we're thinking about the FSA's data rather than the FSS's data, we have different responsibilities, particularly in Northern Ireland. So we've got different questions that sort of appear only in Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of complexity, which you could also think about as richness in this survey. And then you've got that sort of social survey thing of reporting. Rachel, if you then skip to the sort of next slide, which I think is my last slide. We've got all sorts of mitigations that we're trying to sort of take from this. Again, this is an official statistic, which means that there are standards we have to sort of maintain and hit in terms of sort of quality, particularly around things like reducing bias, making things representative. And I suppose other things that we're doing that is sort of relevant here. One of the sort of most relevant things on this slide is having this dialogue with the academic community. Again, this is an administrative survey. We put it together primarily to help ourselves with our objectives. But if there are ways that we can improve that to make it more useful for the world at large, that is something that we would be pursuing. I think I can now hand over to you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Matt. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we use the data from Food and U2 in Scotland. So I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves, Food Standards Scotland, the background and development to our participation in the survey. And then I want to go on to discuss some of the opportunities and challenges that participating in the survey has presented for us. I'll use a couple of examples from the Wave 8 survey about how we've used particular kinds of data, and then more generally how we're using the data, and then just to highlight where Scotland is involved in future surveys. So next slide, please. So Food Standards Scotland, we are a separate body from food standards agencies. We were established in 2015 as a new public sector body in Scotland. This was on the back of the horse meat scandal. And similarly, we're a non-ministerial office, but of the Scottish Government, and we are independent of ministers in industry. And our head office is actually based in Aberdeen. Next slide, please. So, sorry, that's just to say we work very closely with the Food Standards Agency, although we are a separate body. Next slide, please. So we have a similar remit to the Food Standards Agency across the rest of the UK, but with some slight differences as well. We regulate food and feed businesses, provide independent advice to government, business and consumers, protect consumers, develop policy and support trade, and are science and evidence led. Obviously, we're quite a bit smaller, as you might imagine, than Food Standards Agency. But in some respects, we have a slightly wider remit. So we have more of a remit, for instance, around labelling, whereas that is more shared between DEFRA and FSA. Next slide, please. So overall, our vision is to create a safe, healthy and sustainable food environment that benefits and protects the health and well-being of everyone in Scotland. Next slide, please. So in terms of the background to our participation in the Food and U2 survey, this came in conjunction with a new approach that we developed for tracking consumer attitudes and behaviours. We presented a paper at the board, the FSS board, in 2023, which proposed this new approach. And the new approach includes the Food and U2 survey, which for the first time we participated in Wave 8, a continuation of the use of the comms and marketing, communications and marketing tracker, so a tracker similar to what FSA have, although it only runs twice a year. So the Food and U2, as Rachel outlined, is a really robust, sound survey. The trackers are really good for getting more immediate issues that are coming up, but are perhaps not quite at that same gold standard, but they're much more timely. We also use ad hoc surveys and focus groups, and last year we set up a consumer research cross-office group as well. Next slide, please. So the aim of this new approach was to provide a joined up and streamlined approach to consumer research to help us to deliver high quality and timely consumer research using the most appropriate methods to meet what are often very diverse evidence needs, and also to increase the use and impact of consumer data. Next slide, please. So Food and U2 represents a significant pillar of that strategy. And obviously it gives us so many opportunities for that more robust representative consumer data. And in particular, when we went in with the first wave of Wave 8, we were really keen on food safety behaviours. We wanted much more in-depth, reliable data on that. And that was the principal reason why we signed up to Food and U2. But another additional reason was for a comparability across the UK. It had emerged since FSA and FSS do a joint annual report, Our Food, and it came out of that there was some of the data sources were not very comparable. So going forward, having this comparable data will be really useful in that respect. It also presents an opportunity in terms of having more robust and smaller groups. So Scotland's included So whereas the sample size for people with food allergies, intolerances in Scotland is quite small, taken as a whole across the UK, that gives a much better opportunity to understand that data. However, it does come with some challenges. Next slide, please. So it was, as Rachel outlined, it was an established survey, and it's principally designed to meet FSA priorities. And basically, we have fairly limited say in the question design. We do get, obviously, to change FSA to FSS where it's applicable. Also, in addition, our food hygiene information scheme, we have a different scheme in Scotland to the one that is in England. So that needed rewording. It's quite different. So in a sense, what we did, we bought into the sample. We bought a sample of Scotland. What we principally wanted was food safety behaviour, but the survey is so broad, as you see, we got all this other data as well. So next slide, please. That kind of creates an opportunity and a challenge in maximising the use and impact of the data in Scotland. So in a sense, we're a bit like a secondary user of that data as well. Next slide, please. So just in terms of what we've, our output so far, the first wave that we carried out was with wave 8, and we produced a report in February, and this just outlines the kind of key topics. So in terms of what we included in the report, we didn't include everything. We covered food safety in the home, because that was the kind of principal reason why we'd signed up to the survey. And then, but we covered a little bit on some of these other topics as well. Next slide, please. So as an example of something that is from wave 2 around the food safety, there was a question around what do you think the temperature of your inside of your fridge should be. So that should actually be between 0 and 5 degrees C, and 62% of people correctly identified that. Next slide, please. But this means that 36% didn't know what the temperature was or got it incorrect. So this is really useful data for us, and it went on to be form backdrop to further research that we carried out. So our citizen science project, which recorded the inside a fridge temperatures of various citizen scientists. So that came up partly off the back of trying to understand more about people's how they use their fridge. So next slide, please. Another key finding as an example that we used is reheating food. So 82% of respondents reported that they would only reheat food once, which is the recommended. However, 9% would reheat twice and 5% more than that. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of example of some of the things we used for social media messaging, where we took this example and said in the social media what was the correct behaviour to do to remind consumers they should only reheat food once. Next slide, please. And another key way where data is really useful for us, particularly going forward, is in the food allergens and intolerances, which is covered in the Food and U2 Wave survey. So there's quite a lot of data. In our actual key findings report, we just report on prevalence, because in Scotland, the sample size is 320. So granularity is very restricted in terms of analysis. Next slide, please. However, if you take that in conjunction with the rest of the UK, the sample who are basically, this is a self-reported measure of people who are who report being affected as suffering an adverse reaction after consuming certain foods. That's over 1,500. So with that, you get lots more granularity. So we're working towards doing, hopefully from wave 11, a joint UK report based on those figures. So that represents a fantastic opportunity for us, because it's always been a challenge to get enough sample in Scotland to do anything other than a very high level analysis. Next slide, please. And moving on, finally, just a couple of things. The use of Food New 2, other ways that we've used it. Some of the data is used in the joint annual report that I mentioned, and we'll continue to do that, particularly from wave 11 onwards. Social media messaging on food safety behaviours, as I mentioned, reminding consumers what the safe behaviours are. We've used it for context for other reports, as I've also mentioned, in terms of the frost, the fridge recording over a set time of measuring the internal temperatures of fridges. It's also been really useful for benchmarking evidence from other sources. So some of the ad hoc pulse surveys that we carry out, or the FSS Consumer Insights Tracker. As we know, the Food New 2 is a robust survey. Some of the communication surveys are opt-in surveys, so that you're getting a slight balance. So that gives us a way that we can actually more accurately adjust and interpret data from those surveys. It's also been used, as Eleanor mentioned, in the Good Food Nation metrics. But particularly for us, and I'm based in the science team, it's the evidence and monitoring that's been really useful. So understanding food safety behaviours amongst consumers. We've also done a little piece on, we looked at the food hygiene information scheme, although that's just internal at the moment. There's been evidence that we've used on lab-grown meat, gene editing in foods, and meat alternatives, and those have been very high-profile policy issues over the last year. So those are fed into the kind of policy arena. It also highlighted issues around allergens information amongst some consumers, how they prefer, for instance, written information as opposed to verbal information, and the confidence in certain kinds of eating out of home establishments over others. And that's prompted further research. We're following up with qualitative research. And also some of the data on sustainable diets has been really useful for our board in terms of collecting that data. So next slide, please. And just finally, to let you know what we took part in. So we're expecting wave 10. We run a little bit slower than FSA because we are kind of much smaller, and we have quite a very small team, but also we don't get the data till a bit later. So we're hoping to publish that in November, and that'll be the key findings report. We will be hoping to publish alongside England, Wales, Northern Ireland roughly in the next summer. And we have made a commitment in principle to fund a Scotland sample in wave 12, although that is subject to further funding decisions. And final slide, please. So I'd be really interested to know how you're using the data. It always helps us to justify continued funding. And I'm really keen particularly on trying to make more use of the data, and it's still very much an ongoing challenge for us to try and utilise all of the data that we're gathering from Food New 2. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. That was great. I'll just hand over to Beth now, who's going to talk about the use of Food New 2 data in her research. So over to you, Beth.
Could I just share the slides, please, Rachel?
All right, yeah. Do you want me to start sharing mine then?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Excellent. Can you see that okay?
Absolutely perfect, yeah.
Excellent. So, hello everybody. My name is Beth and I'm a researcher based at the University of Sheffield. My research is broadly in the area of healthy and sustainable diets, including things like food safety and inequalities in the food system. And I've been asked to talk to you today about how I've used FoodNew2 data in my research. So I'm going to talk to you quite briefly about examples that, about why I've used the data, how I've used the data, and then take you through some examples in a little bit more detail. So I use the data because it's really good, high quality data. As Matt, Rachel, and Sue have said, it's an official statistic. The sample is great quality, and it also allows me to access a data set that I wouldn't have the resources to collect myself. It's a great time saver. So it allows me to access the data without going through the process of grant applications, collecting the data myself, and it allows me to access the data and analyze it straight away. This also makes it a lot more cost effective. So I'm not paying to collect the same or similar data as that already exists with the FSA. Because of the richness of the data and the size of the sample, it allows me to do some really in-depth analysis. So you can look at things like trends over time, so changes in behaviours, or do in-depth analysis of certain groups of the population and understand what's going on with them. And I also use the data quite a bit for context for developing novel research. So things like building a rationale for another project, or identifying gaps in knowledge and understanding that could be further developed. So really, I think FoodNew is a fantastic set of data. It's free to use and it's relatively untapped. So it has lots of potential for researchers to tap into those new insights. So I think of it like a big pile of unclaimed treasure just sitting there waiting to be discovered. So next I'll run through the main ways that I've used the data. So I've used it quite a lot with journal articles or for journal articles, both secondary analysis of the data itself, but also I've used the FoodNew data to provide context and stats for other research. So grabbing things like the latest food insecurity figures to justify why another piece of research is important. I've used it for quite a few student projects, from undergrad to PhD. And I think the students have found the data quite easy to get to grips with. There's some really good documentation. The data is available in various formats, which means the students can adapt it to the software they're comfortable with. And it's just a really great topical resource for students. So they particularly enjoy things like looking at the food insecurity element or the healthy, sustainable diets. I've used the data a lot in presentations. It's really easy to grab figures for a presentation, either from the reports that the FoodNew team put together or from the data tables which Matt produces. The data tables are a great resource. They provide a really quick and easy way to get new insights and pull out the figures relating to certain groups because we have the cross breaks there. And they can make your presentations really impactful and current. And once you get your head around how to do that, it can become a really easy resource. So, for example, last week I helped a colleague with getting some figures about food secure groups and their behaviours. And they presented it in the Westminster Food Nutrition seminar that happened last week. And they went down really well, and I think really added some current context to ongoing work. I've also used the data a lot for funding bids. So again, for context for funding bids to show the need for a different piece of research, but I've also submitted to the UKRI secondary data analysis initiative, which allows you to analyse food new data or other data sets. I've also used the data for knowledge exchange events, which I'll go through an example in a minute. I've also looked at, for this presentation, the range of topics that I've used. And this is a summary of the modules available in Food and You. And it turns out that I've kind of touched upon everything apart from the eating out and FHRS module. So there's a lot of untapped insight there for anybody wanting to have a go at it. So next I'll take you through some examples of how I've used the data in a little bit more detail. So journal articles are one of the main things that I've used the data for. Both again for secondary analysis of the data itself or for context for other work, so pulling out facts and figures. So one article that I used the Food and You data for that I analysed was a paper called Food Insecurity and Food Bank Use, in which we looked at which groups of the population were more susceptible to food insecurity and which groups are using food banks. So for this, we pulled various waves of Food and You data so we could increase the sample size to the kind of numbers we were wanting. And we took a thematic block building approach to the regression modelling. So we could understand how variables or clusters of variables like demographics, financial factors and geographies are associated with food insecurity and food bank use. So we found some really great stuff within that. But one of the interesting things we found was that food insecurity had gone up, but food bank use had not. And again, just highlighting the importance of the geographies that are provided within the survey data, we found differences across the nations. So we found that those living in Wales were more likely to experience food insecurity, but food bank use didn't vary by country. So it again, I think Eleanor mentioned it's a really good, almost natural experiment to look at policy differences across nations. Another secondary analysis project that I did is called A Risk It for a Biscuit. And this looks at food safety behaviours in older adults. And for this, we looked at how, or the extent to which, different characteristics of individuals are associated with different food safety behaviours. And one area that we were really interested in for older adults was food agency. So as Matt mentioned earlier, the survey asks about people's shopping and cooking behaviours, which gave us some really interesting insights into the impacts of older adults' food safety behaviours. One thing that we also found within this project was that we could explore the knowledge behaviour gap relating to use by dates. So whether somebody knowing what a use by date is increases or influences at all their adherence to that within their home. So I'll very quickly run through a couple more examples. So I've used the data for student projects. So this example was a PhD student who used the data. It gave them a really great opportunity to pick up some data and lead independently on a small project. So they conducted the initial analysis for a conference, but have since written it up as a journal article. So that was a really nice output for them. And again, meant they didn't need to go through the data collection process themselves. So gave them some quite solid outputs quite quickly. Last summer, a colleague and I also had some undergraduate placement students who analysed the Food and You data, looking at different practices or behaviours amongst those who are older and have a disability. So the students got to grips with the data really quickly, even at an undergraduate level. They found some really great insights, and I think enjoyed, again, having the chance to get hands on a real data set rather than a theoretical one, or one that had been constructed just for a class resource. And finally, I will talk you through how I've used it for knowledge exchange. So I organised a series of data hackathon events with a colleague, Christian Reynolds, at City University. And for this, we brought together the Food and You data set and a data set from the H3 project. So people could answer questions which were posed by charities around various food-related topics. The events were really well attended. So we had a range of students, established academics, some lovely people from the FSA, and also some local government representatives. And this, the outputs from the event, apart from the data outputs themselves, we wrote an article about how data hackathons can be used as a knowledge exchange tool and also a teaching tool. And also a second blog, which provides a really nice overview of Food and You too, but also provides a case study, an impact case study of how the data is being used in Northern Ireland. So that's worth a read as well. So in conclusion, I'd like to say Food and You 2 is an excellent resource, but it's really underused. I highly recommend you use it to dip into and grab figures for ongoing work, or just dip into the whole data set for secondary data analysis, or you can use it as a teaching tool. So I think the data is a big, unclaimed pile of treasure, but the FSA are really cool and trying their hardest to share it with us. So that is it from me.
That's great. Thanks, Beth. I feel like every presentation should have a dragon with some sunglasses on. Catalina, I think that really sort of wraps the sort of presentation side things a bit up. Happy just to go on to some Q&A now for any questions that anybody has.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone. Very interesting presentation. So we do have a couple of questions on the chat, which I will ask people to unmute themselves. If anyone else has questions, please do raise your hand. So Stephen Pavel, you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, or do you want me to ask the question?
Happy to ask. I think my voice is just about surviving. It's just a quick one. So I'm thinking, obviously, given my geography, I'm thinking about the Scottish sample. I'm just wondering if there's any scope to include individual level identifiers that can enable linkage to patient level health data and other data sets. I know you don't want to do anything that reduces the sample and, you know, takes away from people wanting to actually participate, but I'm just thinking about the advantages, for instance, of being able to link census data and things like that.
Well, I can answer part of that, but I might have to pass over for other parts of it. From Wave 11, we have actually, we are going to include the individual data necessary for linking it's not entirely sure what will happen after that, and how that works. I don't know if the actual process of it might be Eleanor who can explain. She's here.
I am here, Stephen. Thanks, Sue. Yes, no, that's absolutely why Research Data Scotland are so excited about this, and we're working really closely with both FSS and FSA who do the collection to understand how do we get that individual level data there. You know, what is the appetite of the public to share the level of information we'd require in order to be able to do the linkage. But I think, you know, Beth's given us some fantastic examples of it being used kind of standalone without that individual level data. But I think the power, as you've just described there, comes when we can link things together as well. It just opens up a whole different set of avenues for us. So we're really excited about doing that. But obviously we've got to be cautious because we are trying to, you know, take the public with us on this as well.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Javier Escudero, you also have a question? Please
Yes,
unmute
thank
yourself.
you. Yes, thank you very much. Very, very interesting presentation. I was wondering if, you know, if there's any data or any further detail about children living in those households. It seems like it's mainly driven by carers, right, parents, but is there any level of detail about the children themselves, or it's just part of the household? Thank you.
So I can take that, Rachel. So yeah, the survey is answered by adults, so it would be the carer. We do record whether there are children in the household, and so there are all sorts of questions. You know, for instance, on allergen, going when you're shopping for yourself or people in your household who have an allergy, and we have cross breaks for we break it down as to whether there are children under 6 in the household and under 16. So we've got a certain amount of granularity, but it's not from the child's perspective. It's from the perspective of the adult respondent in the house answering the survey on behalf of the household.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And Lindsay Williams?
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, working in food waste. I haven't used the dataset before, and I was wondering how I would access both the Scottish side of the dataset and the kind of overarching dataset, whether they're kept separately, and whether I'd need to go through a certain body of the university to do that.
I can definitely answer for the FSA nations. It's up on the UK Data Service. So we've got SPSS files. I think we've got it probably in CSV format. The report and the data tables are probably on the FSA, or the report will definitely be on the FSA site. I think the data tables, so our outputs, will also be stored there. Not sure on Scotland.
Yeah, so the Scotland data is stored on the UK DS at the same time, I believe. So that's all available. In terms of the data tables, we publish the data tables with the report. So the latest one that we've got is Wave 8. So we haven't published Wave 10 yet, but the data tables will be going up when the report is published, which will be in November.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, I think we are coming to a close to a very, very interesting session. And I will ask Rachel, if you can, maybe you can share contact details of if anyone has further questions or want to engage with your team, as well as Susan, maybe.
Yeah,
if you can post them in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just put those I'll put mine and Sue's in the chat now, and we can always like direct you to anybody else that might be relevant. But they should be in the chat for everybody now.
So thank you so much, everyone. Wonderful presentations, and yeah, we look forward to see you on the next webinar. We will update everyone on time.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks.